So as Johnny said, this is part two. Basically, just to remember the numbering system that we're using on the website and so forth. As an example, ASMB 161 is Assistant Scout Master from the 1960 period, and it's the first badge in the period. So let me do a quick correction from session one. In session one, I mentioned that, and I had on slide 8, that the armbands were worn over uniform sleeves and not worn on uniform clothing. That statement in itself is incorrect. From doing some more research and looking at some publications, armbands, this is the official documentation, armbands are for use of Scout officials and members of troop committees and local councils when not in uniform. So when wearing civilian wear. However, it is true that some did wear them as described for the purposes of keeping them in better condition and cleaner and all that kind of good stuff. So I just wanted to issue that correction. Okay, so we left off in session one with this badge, the first class round with the marrowed edge that came in kind of 212 varieties. So moving on from there, we get to the 1970 to 72 range when the design committee changed from a first class emblem to a Tenderfoot emblem. And this comes basically with two kinds of backs during this period. You get the gauze starch back and you get the clear waffle plastic back. Not much in the way of variety in the fronts. I would imagine if you lined up 100 of them, you could find some sort of manufacturing variation that you could call out if you wanted to, but for the most part, we don't. So let's talk just a little bit about the back so we're all on the same page. So plastic backs, we hear the term waffle and we hear the term molded. So let's talk about the waffle pattern plastic back. So when you turn over a plastic back, kind of put it on an angle, you can see what looks like dimples in it from a waffle. Now, the reason for that is because in the early 70s, patch manufacturers, instead of using white glue or starch that they had to paint on the back of the fabric, were sold this idea that they could buy these machines like you might see in a t-shirt shop. After the square of emblems is embroidered, they would turn it upside down and put it on the colored piece there. Then they would take a piece of silicone, which is the pattern, the vibrant pattern there, and put it on top, they'd put a piece of plastic on top of the embroidery backside, and they'd put this silicone cloth over top of it that had a really coarse weave in it. Then they'd close the clamshell and heat it at approximately 250 degrees for about 30 seconds. And then that would adhere the plastic to the back of the badge. And when they raised it up, opened the clamshell back up, because it was a coarse weave, it would leave this dimple pattern in the plastic. Hence, we call it waffle. Now that lasted for a while. Different manufacturers used that process for about 4 years, but they realized that it was kind of labor intensive. You had to have a person, loading all this stuff and unloading this stuff and so forth. So then the manufacturers moved from a waffle pattern process to the molded process, which is much like a little pizza oven. So what they do here is after the embroidery is done, they turn it upside down, slap a piece of plastic on top of it, lay it on the conveyor belt, turn around, go back to the embroidery machine, and it would pop out the other end. And because it was heated at about 250 degrees, the plastic would actually mold to the back of the embroidery. So sometimes when you turn a patch over with a plastic back, you can feel the threads, you can feel all sorts of, little spikes in it. That's where it's been heated and actually adhered to the back. So as we think about these badges in this period, you can have a waffle pattern. You can either have blue plastic or white, clear plastic. The reason one of the manufacturers used blue is very simple. When I interviewed them, they said, well, when we first started using plastic, people couldn't find it. They, so forth. So they used a blue tint plastic to make it easy in the manufacturing process. That's the only reason there's a blue tint to it. So we'll keep this in mind as we go forward, because I'll reference these different types of backs. Okay, so once we leave the round that's small, and again, that round is 65 millimeters in diameter, so it's a fairly small round. We then move to the round that we know quite well from the 70s and 80s period, Tenderfoot Emblem, and many of us may have wore this thing on our shirt sleeve during that time period. However, like with anything, it's not as simple as, and that's the badge from 1973 to 1989. Because during this period in time, National Supply became really cost conscious, and cost became the main driver. So you can imagine that when cost becomes the main driver of your process, you're going to buy from people that are offering you really good pricing. And National Supply did that. So let's start taking a look at some of this. So here's 3 examples of 3 different embroiderers they used. And there's significant differences between the 2. And down at the bottom are listed some of the backs and some of the different twill combinations. And I'm only giving you a small sampling, guys. If you go out there and find 100 of these Assistant Scoutmasters from this time period, you're going to find a lot of variation. And this is where the madness is of, so how do you collect this stuff? And I don't have a real answer to that. It's really personal preference. You can collect varieties, you can collect twill directions, you can collect a specific manufacturer. It's ever what you want to do. But if you look at the first one, you can see it's got 3 distinct stars. The top of the crown is kind of straight looking. The tail feathers actually point inward as they go down. Then if you look at the one in the middle, the stars are less distinct. The crown shape has changed, and the tail feathers are even a little bit rounded on each side. Then another manufacturer, for some reason, put a white line in between separating the shield parts. And again, the tapered concave shaped crown and the rounded feathers. So similar to this, maybe the same manufacturer, we don't know, but without line, with line, okay? Well, the madness keeps going. Now we get into a really wide fleur-de-lis. Well, it's still got a white line, but now the tail feathers change to an outward direction at the bottom. And you got a really wide crown line with a wide line crown. Another manufacturer, the crown got narrower, and pretty much everything else kind of stayed the same. And then there's another one where, and this is with the white line. Here's without the white line and the same type of crown. Again, different twill directions, different backs. It keeps going. We have one manufacturer decided instead of 3 tail feathers, 1 was enough. And the stars became more distinct. And then right before we changed to the tan design, a manufacturer came up with this, where they changed the wings to really thin wings and really 3 distinct tail feathers at the bottom with big stars. So are these all the varieties? I doubt it. It's how deep do you want to look? And how many of these things do you want to put in a pile? So if you were to go to probably Jason and say, Jason, let me see all of your Assistant Scoutmaster positions, he'd probably give you a stack about a foot tall, and you'd find these plus probably 6 or 8 or 10 more varieties. Again, this was a time period when scouting used anybody that would offer them a really good price. And it was more about price than it was about anything. So while this was the primary design that was used from 73 to 89, we also had in that time period training for Scoutmasters and Assistant Scoutmasters. And for those Scoutmasters and Assistant Scoutmasters that went through the Scout training program, they were permitted to wear this badge. Now, again, here you can start to see, if we think back to some of the previous designs, here's that tail that points downward, the three big stars. So basically, this is the same design as that manufacturer who created one of the regular badges. But here you can also see that this background, this back, is very blue from the plastic that was used. There are some people that I've heard in the collecting community that call this the tidy bowl blue background plastic. So, and just like the other ones, we have variety in this. You've got the, as we said, the three distinct stars. You got the tail feathers that are pointing inward. You got the tail feathers that are pointing outward. This particular one, the white lines actually run up and connect to the stars. And then there's this oddball one that we've found. All of the ones that we think were official, like this, are all horizontal embroidery. You can see both of these varieties. And then there's this one with vertical embroidery. We think this is probably a private issue, but we're not sure. We've seen very few of these pop up through the time of, that they've been out there. The first two varieties here, like I said, you can get them in blue plastic, waffle, you can get them in starched back, you can get them in molded back, clear waffle. It just happened to be whatever the manufacturer was using for the back. Now, if you think about it, all the back does is prevent the embroidery when the emblem is punched out from the edge unraveling while it's in transit to the marrow department to put the marrowed edge on. So they used starch, they used plastic, they used white glue. All that did was secure the embroidery edge after it was punched out. It's strictly something internal to badge making, so that when they cut those things out and throw them in a basket, and then that basket is carried over to the marrowed shop and they start marrowing the edges of the patch don't start to degrade or unravel because the plastic holds them together, or the starch, or whatever they're using for the back. So whether or not you count backs, that's completely up to you. Okay, so after the period where we used both the train badge and the regular badge, we then had a uniform change. So in 1989, if you remember, the uniform color changed, and we went to this tan background, and it had what we call just a plain back. And when I say a plain back, that means there's no printing or an emblem image of any kind on the back. So there's pretty much kind of one main design of these. There's not a whole lot of variation. Although, again, you can go out there and you can probably put 100 of these together and you can find variation. And, for the most part, it's MVE. But it's sort of madness in collecting these things. Depending upon what you want, how deep you want to go, there is left twill, there is right twill, there is twill back, there's the Pellon reinforced back, which is actually a white, really thin fabric that is adhered to the tan color cloth using a sizing so that then they embroider and it adds stiffness, and then they put the plastic back over top of it. So some of these you'll see that have a white or sort of a whitish back. Some you'll just see a plain tan back. Those are just covered with plastic. So you see a lot of variation in these different backs. Again, have fun with whatever it is you want to try to collect in those. So after starting in 2002, Scouting said we need to start protecting the badges again. So they started doing copyright protection by putting Scout stuff on the back. Again, you've got all sorts of right twills, left twills, twill backs with a Pellon reinforced back, or just a plastic with the imprint we call a pressed back. And that goes back to the clamshell type machine, but instead of having a really coarse piece of silicone, it's a really fine mesh that leaves very little imprint on the back. Again, you can look for varieties in these if you want to, try to find manufacturers. There are some, again, it's all in how much you want to collect. Now, the interesting thing about this is, and I'll tell you a personal story that actually happened to me here is, I went into a scout shop, and it was in North Carolina, and I bought several Scoutmaster badges for my own troop. And in there, somehow I had picked up an Assistant Scout Master by mistake. And I went to return it. And because my Assistant Scoutmaster was one like this, without an imprinted back, it did not have Scout stuff on it. And all I did was walk out the door to the car, and I walked back in to return that badge. And I was told it was a fake because it didn't have, or a counterfeit because it didn't have the Scout stuff on the back. That's a true story, by the way. This was in the time of really interesting decision-making. After the Scout stuff came out, in 2009, there was a BPA scare. Some of you may remember in the news, there was a scare about baby bottles and the little inserts that go in them of having BPA as part of the manufacturing process coming out of China. So the FDA determined at that time that no plastic coming out of China could have BPA in it. Unfortunately, the Scout stuff plastic that was manufactured and used on the back of badges had BPA. So in 2009, for several months, all scouting badges produced in China had a plain polyethylene plastic back on them. Those badges have a really smooth feel to them. They're very different than the plastic that was used in the 1990s. And it was only for a very short period of time. So again, the front is the same, but the back is very different. Then we moved to in 2010, and part of the reason in 2010 we moved to this back was because of the BPA scare. They had an opportunity to do a redesign, so they redesigned the back of the badge logo to the 2010 anniversary logo. And again, the fronts are pretty much the same, twill directions in both ways, plus occasionally they reverse the twill, and we call that twill back. And you can get it with, as you can see here, there's gauze underneath the imprint. You can get it without the gauze under the imprint. There's lots of different varieties you can get. Again, it depends upon how deep you want to go. So after 2010, we get into the 2017 to current period, which is where we have the since 1910 backing. Now, for many of you, if you start to turn over badges, you may find a little sticker on the back that says made in China. You know, it's very common to find that. There was a ruling from the government that said all things made in China had to have some sort of indicator that they were made in China. So for a long period of time, especially during the 2010 back and the Scout stuff back, you would see these little gold stickers that said made in China. Well, Scouting wanted to do away with that sticker. So what they devised is a plan, and it's in place today. This emblem you see here has large fleur-de-lis on the back. That means that it's made in China. There's the same design, except the emblems are really small and there's more per inch on a badge. Those are made in the US. So the domestic ones are small, the foreign made ones are big. It's a way they're getting around stickering the badges. It saves a little cost, but it meets the US requirement of logoing anything that comes out of China so that people know about it. The problem is most people around Scouting have no idea that the large emblem means that it's made in China. Let me just mention that as we get into this kind of since 1910 and especially after 2010 series, you get these color variations and MBE, and again, you can kind of do with it what you want. As kind of a historian, I look at it and say, and as an old manufacturer, I look at it and say, it's not worth the effort to try to quantify these, because you can have just about any shade variation of brown that you can think of being used. Okay, 1989 to 1998, the Assistant Scoutmaster Venture Badge. So some of you may remember leadership corps in troops, where the leadership corps wore a red badge on their sleeve. Some were round and some were kind of an odd shape. Well, venturing and varsity replaced leadership corps in 1989. So in a troop that chose the venture route, a Scoutmaster was assigned to be the shepherd of that group, and he got or she got to wear the venture badge. If, on the other hand, your troop elected to have varsity, then the Assistant Scoutmaster responsible for the varsity program within the troop would wear the varsity Assistant Scoutmaster badge. Well, those programs ended in 98 for venture and 93 for varsity. And then the one last Assistant Scoutmaster that you'll sometimes see is this one, which is the Assistant Scoutmaster that's kind of assigned to shepherd the OA kind of members and be the kind of the OA program person in the troop, if the troop is of a large enough size to actually have one of these. Most of these badges where you see with the arrow or varsity or venture needs a larger troop where you actually have groups or almost a patrol, if you will, of the associated scouts, that you would need a specialized Scoutmaster to be a specialized Assistant Scoutmaster to be their Assistant Scoutmaster. So that's the later time period of badges. Again, what makes this so crazy is that we've identified probably 20 to 25 different embroiders that were used that used and created their own design. It's incredible the number of variations and variety that you can go after and you can find. No one has ever cataloged these. I don't know whether we ever will, because it's impossible to know exactly how many different variations there are out there. Because even if the same manufacturer was used more than once, that doesn't mean they used the same artwork the second time that they produced the badge. They may have gotten rid of the artwork. They may have redrawn the artwork. It's impossible to know. So that's part 2. Hopefully you can find that kind of interesting.
Ron, here's a couple things for you. The since 1910 plastic back was actually introduced in 2013, not 2017.
Okay.
I have dated patches. I've been trying to figure these things out myself for years, a couple years anyway, and I've found dated patches starting in 2013 with the since 1910.
Yeah, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, Rob, because we didn't see the since 1910 in merit badges until 1917. That's when the first ones were produced. They were using up the plastic. So it's hard to tell exactly when different badges were used.
Yeah, what I've been trying to do is with CSPs, and with CSPs, looking for dated CSPs. And
Right.
I've got dated CSPs from 2013 is the first year that I've seen that backing. It definitely was out by 2013.
Oh yeah, I know it was out. There are certain badges that we didn't see it in until much later.
So what you're saying is that you didn't see that in the Assistant Scout Master position patch until 2017.
Correct.
At the end of your presentation, you mentioned a Assistant Scout Master with an arrow on it.
Yes.
What I misunderstood maybe what you said, because I have a different opinion as to what it was.
Okay.
The Assistant Scoutmaster with this arrow on, he was the advisor to the youth that was the OA representative from the chapter or the lodge.
That was in the troop.
That was in the troop.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, he was responsible for advising the
youth, the individual youth who
yes
was the OA representative.
Yeah, and a troop could have one or many of those OA representatives.
I'm not sure I'd agree with that. Normally you have one OA rep per unit. Hey, Ron, how did you find out about this decision to use the smaller and larger fleur-de-lis backings for the US versus China manufacturing?
I asked when I was in Charlotte.
And that's what they told you. That's what it's intended to be, because they don't publicize that anywhere as far as I know.
No, I never knew it.
And it looks like that probably started about 2019 from what I saw from dated patches.
Well, doesn't manufacturers are asked to put a backing? Don't they go and they get their own little dye sublimation on the plastic, and different manufacturers have different variations of it?
Actually, Michael, it all comes into Charlotte and they send it out. There are sitting in Charlotte skids of the plastic that will be shipped to the manufacturer.
They send it to the manufacturer. What happens when an organization goes to a scout supplier of emblems? Okay, different companies who are licensed by the BSA, and they send it to their companies that they want to send it to, and they request a backing on it with, saying whatever the emblem, or saying BSA, or sometimes they order it and say, I don't want a backing. And when it comes in, they put a sticker on it.
Yeah, there's for the most part, for the standard emblems in Insignia, the high volume stuff that's being made, there are the two backings. Now there are, sometimes they make a really small run and you don't see any backing on them at all. But the stuff that they're using all the time, like these assistant scoutmasters, the ranks and so forth, all of those, because of the volume that they're dealing with and the contracts, the BSA is supplying them the plastic.
So when some company in China makes them, they send over the plastic?
Yes. That's what Charlotte told me.
And of course, that's only for the BSA supply stuff. If you're a council or you're a lodge and you're ordering from AB Emblems or Sunshine
Yeah,
or
that's a
Marit
completely
or
different
whatever,
ballgame.
you're getting their proprietary backing, but that
Yes.
backing in some way has to indicate the fact that they're licensed. If they don't
Yes.
have the backing of their own for that, then they use that hologram sticker, which probably comes from National.